Hello everyone, welcome to 1854 Presents. I'm your host Zoe Harrison. I'm head of production here at 1854 Media, and our guest today is Leah Clements. Hello Leah. So just before I get into Leah's description, we're just going to do a quick visual description for visually impaired viewers. So Leah, would you like to go first?
Yep, so I am a white woman in her early 30s. I have at the moment it looks quite dark, but I promise it's actually kind of dark blonde, straightish hair, and I have a patterned top on, and you can kind of see some plants behind me.
I am a white woman with mid-length brown hair with a black short sleeve top on, and I have a poster behind me that says "Cool to be kind" in a white room. So Leah is an artist and writer based in London whose practice focuses on the relationship between psychological, emotional and physical. And her work has been exhibited internationally from London to Rome. In 2019, and in collaboration with Lizzie Rose and Alice Hattrick, Clements launched Access Docs for Artists, an online resource to help disabled artists communicate their access needs with galleries, art organisations and other employers. So hello Leah, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm all right. Thank you.
Great.
How are
you? I'm all the better for speaking with you. So again, before we kind of get into the conversation too much, I always ask our guests here just to describe their own practice in their own words. I obviously described it very, very briefly there, but for those who may not know your work, how would you describe what it is that you do?
Yeah, so I kind of work in a lot of different media, and I used to say that it was mostly based in film and performance, but that's actually not so true anymore. I mean, which I think we might get into later, photography has become a much bigger part of my practice more recently. Otherwise, I guess I wouldn't be talking to you. Yeah, writing as well. And then my most recent solo show, which was the East Side Projects, was a kind of immersive audio, visual, sculptural, light-based installation kind of room. So kind of work across everything. But the themes I focus on are I was trying to think how to put it really generally. It's, I guess, what most of it has in common is that it's things that are quite difficult to put your finger on or hard to describe, or that don't even have words. And that's usually something that relates to, well, that's something emotional or physical or psychological, usually a personal experience that people have had or have individually, but then I'm quite interested in recollectivizing those things. So I think the work of mine that is the best example to explain that would be a film I made in 2019 called Collapse, which I shot in thermal imaging in a sleep centre where I was being tested for narcolepsy. And then separate to the filming, I did some interviews with 7 people who have not been diagnosed with narcolepsy, but who fall asleep in times of distress as a coping mechanism. And not one of them knew that anyone else did that. They all thought that they were the only person who did this. And it kind of ranged from somebody who, when they're feeling low, just wants to sleep a lot, to somebody who would be in extremely dangerous situations, which I won't repeat here without a trigger warning, but in like really seriously dangerous situations could not stay awake and would just fall asleep. But then to bring all those voices back together in that film does something to point out that this experience isn't individual, or it's nuanced and it's idiosyncratic, but it's something that more people have experienced, but just because we don't have a language, like a diagnosis or a cultural signifying term, we don't know that other people feel it. And then it's also kind of microcosmetic in that it kind of, other people who don't exactly have the same thing might be able to recognize something of that in themselves, or like recognize that if if this many people are having to fall asleep or do fall asleep just to remove themselves from a situation,
Mhm.
what is going on in our wider world.
Mhm.
So I think that probably um, is a good descriptor of a lot of my work, which kind of picks out bits of that and then will kind of expand in different ways.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking more generally about your practice, what is the role of photography in your work?
So it's become more and more of a focus of mine in probably the last year. There were a few years before that where I was kind of doing a bit of experimental work with photography, but I um, bought an Olympus OM1 last year and
Mhm.
just kind of really fell in love with analog photography again, which I had done at AS level, but that's some time ago.
Yeah.
And just that kind of, just thinking about it as a kind of magic that, you don't know how it's going to look until you get it developed and get it back. You have to have that delay.
Mhm.
Um, don't know. You don't, you don't know whether it's going to be, can
Mm.
I
Yeah.
swear?
Oh God, yeah.
Okay, you don't know whether it's going to be total shit or if it's, going to be amazing, or maybe
Yeah.
like maybe the whole reel is shit, but then there's like one amazing photo.
Mhm.
But also just the kind of process literally of it being, in the basics of it being capturing light. And I've been working on this series for a while that's um, basically just photos of moments where the sun is shining on something and it's clearly this like really brief moment, that just trying to capture it. So sometimes it might be creating a reflection by like shining on a glass of water and then that's bounced off onto the wall in this way that's like made something that looks like a ghost, or just is a little bit magic. And they're usually in these domestic, or if not always domestic, then kind of quotidian situations that are otherwise somewhat dull, and it's just like this brief special moment.
Mhm.
So that's I've been kind of working on that for a while, and showed one of those photos as a slide in an exhibition earlier this month in Hastings called Oceanic Feelings. It was a group show
Mhm.
curated by Mariana Lemas. So it's
Mhm.
also then showing that as a slide. It's like then translated back through light, and it's almost like,
Yeah.
it's this moment that's being held, that you're kind of making it exist for longer than it should. Like it made me think of when you're a kid. Well, I'm saying this generally. Maybe you didn't do this. Maybe
Mhm.
it was just me. But like jumping off the sofa and thinking you're going to float at some point if you just keep practicing. Just
Yeah.
like capturing that floating moment that's like anti-gravity or something.
Yeah. There is absolutely something magic about it. Like as an example, my partner, his parents gave him a little point and shoot 35mm camera. And he shot some stuff from a festival he went to, and we got it processed, and I sat and scanned it with him. And the first half, we didn't realize the first half of the film um, was in there from whenever he was 2. So the first half of the roll of film was him as a 2-year-old, and the second half was him at a festival at the age of 22. It's just such a sweet little like time travel. It was just I got really, I don't think he got as excited as I did, but I was very excited by it. But yeah, there's definitely something exciting. Again, talking about your process, which artists would you say that you draw most inspiration from whenever you're creating your work?
I think that, like, artist-wise, I think I draw more from other artists on how to work, like how to practice as an artist, than the like manifestation of the work itself. Or like,
Mm.
so people like Johanna Hedberg, Carolyn Lazard, Bella Milroy, so loads of people who have kind of taught me how to work as a chronically ill artist.
Mhm.
But in terms of the actual content of the work, I think it's, for me, I think I draw a bit more on film and music, filmed like I don't know, like World on a Wire by Fassbinder, just
Mm.
like really amazing, crazy aesthetic,
Mm.
or just like more like The Second Coming by Debbie Tucker Green.
Mm.
It's amazing. Or A State of Weightlessness, which is this documentary, Russian documentary about Soviet space travel, which is just like, it was made in the time that it's about, so it is that kind of really grainy,
Yeah.
nice footage, and just like some of the people in it just have really nice voices as well, just like the aesthetics of that. And then music are just musicians like Andy Stott just conjures up scenes in my head when I listen to it, and then that translates back into my work. Or like
Mm.
on a more classical end, Zbigniew Priestner, who made most of the music for oh man, I can't remember the director's name now. Very famous
Mhm.
Polish French director who did Three Colors Blue. But yeah, it was Zbigniew Priestner, whose name I'm sure I'm not pronouncing properly,
Mm.
did all of the film scores for that director, and then made an album, or I'm not sure whether he would use like the classical term for it, whatever that would be, called Requiem for My Friend, when that director died. And it's just beautiful and amazing and really like dramatic.
Mm.
It's one of those kind of things that just like, ugh.
Yeah.
But it wasn't for a film, but it was just, yeah. Kind of, even though it wasn't for a film, it's so filmic, you start seeing
Yeah.
film it could be, or I do
Yeah.
in my mind.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of speaking more just about you, how did the past 18 months look like in your life?
I think so. Staying at home a lot, as most people,
Mm.
um, which did make a difference for me, but I think was probably less of a difference in many ways than for most people, because I do have chronic illness, which means I don't leave the house as much as other people anyway.
Mhm.
Um, and kind of having a lot of conversations with other disabled people about that, other able-bodied people about that,
Mhm.
and I don't know, trying to support one another. My work didn't actually slow down, like art practice work. It just I don't know how. I don't know anyone else that wasn't the case for. I think it's just like by coincidence of what I was working on. So I was co-curating a show in Vilnius, which went
Mm.
into lockdown quite a long time after we did in the UK. So
Mhm.
I didn't make it over, but
Mhm.
I was working on that a lot. And then I
Mhm.
did a performance there as well, which was vicarious. I watched it on a screen and I wasn't actually there.
Oh, that's
um,
so annoying.
yeah, but it was kind of interesting because it was I think the performers did amazing, and everyone else who
Mm.
organised it for me.
Mm.
But it was, so the performance is called Hyperbaric, and it was originally commissioned by Somerset House Studios. So I
Mhm.
performed it for the first time at Somerset House Studios in February 2020.
Mm.
It's like just before we went into lockdown.
Yeah.
So it's like the kind of last moment. I haven't done a performance since then, actually.
Mm. That's
Uh,
mad.
yeah, and it's based on interviews I did with people who spent prolonged periods of time in hospital. So pre-lockdown, it was this theme of people not being able to leave where they are,
Mm.
being in this medical environment and not being able to leave. So it was all through claustrophobia. And I had the curators at the end of the performance go around and close these shutters as the music was kind of mounting, so you could start to feel a bit tense and
Yeah.
shut. And then, of course, by the time I did it again in Vilnius, I didn't need to do that because that was what was happening, and we did it like a week before they went into lockdown.
Mm.
So it was quite an interesting like
Wow.
way of bookmarking the year. But
Yeah.
yeah, so and then beyond that, I don't know. It's kind of been a lot of ups and downs because some things I have found easier because of my disability. It just has been easier in some ways for everyone to switch to online, and
Mm.
not to be so many demands made of like turning up in person.
Mhm.
But of course, like that can be tiring as well.
Mhm.
And yeah, I don't know, personally had a lot of good stuff happen and had some loss as well and some not great stuff. But I think, do you know what, where I'm at now, and I don't think I'm the only person, is I'm finding it harder to transition out of lockdowns
Absolutely.
into,
It's
yeah.
so like it's trying to be social again. I'm forgotten how to do it. I've completely forgotten how to do it. But anyway, should we speak about Siren of the Deep?
Yeah, sure.
What was the inspiration behind Siren of the Deep?
So it kind of came out of a previous work, which actually often happens. I made a film called To Not Follow Under in 2019, which was more interviews. It's a really big part of my work. I made a film in 2019 called To Not Follow Under, which I interviewed a sleep neurologist, a psychotherapist, and a deep sea supervising rescue diver. So 3 people who are in positions of care over other people, about the limits of empathy and at what point you have to prioritize your own safety or health in order to continue to care for other people.
Mhm.
So in the divers situation, that's quite literal. That's like, she was talking about avoiding being drowned by people who are panicking in the water.
Mhm.
And just during the course of our interview, one thing she mentioned was this kind of myth of the Siren of the Deep, which she said is something that people in the diving community talk about when there's deaths in diving. So when they know somebody who's died, they'll say, "Oh, it was the siren of the deep calling." And it kind of identifies this feeling that a lot, if not all of them, have of like not wanting to come back up from the bottom of the ocean and just wanting to stay down, and that kind of like just being in total awe and not wanting to leave it and literally come back to earth, not wanting
Yeah.
to. So I was like, as soon as she said it, I was like, I need to make a word about this.
Yeah.
And so I sort of went in search of other people who've had this, and it's kind of difficult to find. Divers don't talk about it that openly, and I think for a fair enough reason, which is I think that it as a sport, because it does have a lot of dangers attached to it potentially. They don't want to make it seem, I don't know, they don't want to exacerbate how dangerous it's read as.
Yeah.
So yeah, but so instead I kind of was looking at all different kinds of people who might experience something similar, and I found an interview with this NASA astronaut called Scott Kelly, who he with his so he went with a Russian cosmonaut. So the 2 of them, who called Mikhail, I can't remember his surname unfortunately, and my Russian pronunciation is terrible, but the 2 of them are the people who have stayed in space the longest. They were on the International Space Station for a year. When they came back, I was just really struck by Scott Kelly, the American astronaut, not responding to the interview questions in this like press conference with the kind of positive attitude you'd expect of a kind of American media setup. Just falling a little bit flat, nothing dramatic.
Yeah.
But they asked if he was happy to be back or relieved or glad or something, and he basically said no. He was like, man. It was like, it's an amazing place, and then I started finding all these other interviews with like an Italian astronaut, another American one, who just said they just did not want to come back, and they don't, if they could go back, they would immediately.
That's so interesting.
Yeah. So, and then you have these divers that have this similar feeling of both not wanting to come back to Earth. and then I kind of expanded that into other experiences. So like drug users not wanting to come down off a high and just wanting to get back to the high.
Mm.
And someone with a really intense religious experience who kind of almost couldn't be happy afterwards because she'd had this moment of such euphoria, and then life compared to that afterwards. Even though she, the time before, after that, life was difficult.
Yeah.
And so I kind of took snippets of these interviews with people, which for once I didn't do myself, because I didn't want to force answers, and I already had the answers I wanted.
Yeah.
And worked that into an audio with some kind of siren-y. It's actually my voice, but it's really warped and like had loads of effects on it, into a siren-y song that kind of mounts into this moment of bliss. And in the exhibition itself, there's a pool in the middle that's lined with fabric, so it looks almost like an abandoned medical experiment or something. And then there's some sculptures in the corner, and then these lights come on for a second, or not for a second, for a minute, and then they turn off again. And then that's when kind of the scribe coming back and not wanting to come back. Yeah, so it's a really experiential piece of work.
Yeah, I think that kind of why we're talking about it is we're talking about it being a really as you said, experiential piece of work, but you also created a video of the exhibition. That's I'm right in saying that, aren't I? Yeah. Why did you decide to create that video?
Well, I think I would have made it had COVID not been a thing anyway. But there was this added environment where galleries, art organisation, or arts organisations, I should say, because it includes other kinds of music and stuff, were much more willing than usual, or more open than usual, to alternative modes of presenting, because we didn't know, at certain points you didn't know whether your show was going to open or not, and if it did, was it going to be just presented digitally?
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to make it, I'm always kind of thinking about how to make my work accessible anyway, so I wanted to make it for people who wouldn't be able to visit it in person because of disability or socioeconomic or other reasons. And actually working with the Eastside team, who are really wonderful, I think they would have let me do it even if COVID wasn't a thing. They're really supportive. But it did feel like now is maybe the time to do it, in terms of being listened to, or to shout about it a bit more, because a lot of people just, like, kind of as a byproduct of able-bodied people being accommodated because they were all at home, some disabled people were able to like benefit a bit from that too. But yeah, it's still on the Eastside Project's website, so it's also kind of a nice way of recording it and keeping it. And it's on my website, and I would also be up for like screening it elsewhere, as like for itself, but also as an example of something that can be done.
Yeah.
That access, yeah.
And what was the intention of the work? What were you hoping to kind of portray to your viewers?
I think it is that placing people in that experience of a kind of come up and come down, and where every day is a difficult place to be, and just wanting to be somewhere else. But because it's on a loop, you can kind of decide when you leave it. So the film itself isn't on a loop, but you can, like, obviously you could do that yourself if you're watching it at home. But then in the gallery, you could leave on the peak, so you're walking away on the high, or you could come back down to earth and leave at that. But I guess it's quite a affectful experience of just like living through it.
Yeah. And what's the reaction been like so far with people that have either gone to see it or seen it online?
Really good. It's been really nice. So it was on Frieze magazine's top 5 exhibitions to see in the UK and Ireland, and did a few interviews and that kind of attention, but then also just like feedback from the people who saw it, and East Side's the team kind of feeding me back things that people were saying when they visited. It's just really nice. Like they have this group of young people who apparently said that they'd like to have a space to like sit down quietly with some coloured pencils and like get out their thoughts or feelings afterwards because it's so intense.
I mean, that's a good reaction.
Yeah, I'm choosing to say it as a compliment. I was like, oh God, have I traumatized them? They're like, no, in a good way. All right. Yeah, and there was a marine biologist diver who went to see it, who apparently heard about it through diving channels rather than one. Yeah, so I was like, oh, I've got a nice like audience there.
Yeah, I mean, target audience, definitely. Yeah.
And he said that it, because he wasn't able to dive obviously because of COVID, that it did kind of elicit a lot of the same feelings in him. So, yeah, which I feel is quite successful.
Oh yeah. So really great feedback. Kind of as good as you get, really. So we've spoken a little bit about inclusivity and accessibility within the arts industry. And you created access docs for artists. Could you tell us a little bit about what this is and kind of why you created it?
Yeah, so it is an online resource. It's a website that explains what an access doc is and how you might want to make one, and gives kind of extra information as well. Basically, it was the product of a residency that I did at Wising Arts Centre, and Alice Hattrick, who is a writer whose book Ill Feelings has just come out, published by Fitzcarraldo, and it's amazing. Oh. Everyone should get it. And Lizzie Rose, who is an artist based in Margate and is wonderful, and everyone should follow on Instagram because her feed is amazing. We were in residence there together at Wising Arts Centre, and then like other people were there, other people visiting, like Johanna Hedberg came and stayed with us for I think 4 days, and we video called people like Carolyn Lazard and Abby Palmer, and yeah, we were kind of doing a lot of research. We wanted to know, how can we survive, how can we work as disabled artists working in the art world, and a lot of the people we spoke to were a bit more advanced than us, had been doing it for longer, or just knew other people, had done more research, had lived through it a bit more, and just like we paid them for their time, so it wasn't any kind of exploitation, but just learning from them, and also just they are just so generous. And that was kind of one of the main things that came out of it, as a clear thing that we could take away with us, that we could also share with as many people as possible who might need it, because we didn't want to just keep all this to ourselves. It wasn't just for us. So making an access doc, which is, it's basically just a document that lists your access needs, that you can obviously, if you're working as an artist or other kind of art worker, you're going to be changing who you are, changing who you're working with all the time, sometimes once a month even. So having to explain what your access needs are every time, really tiring. And you do still have to do some work when you do have an access doc, but at least it's all there and you don't have to think it through.
Yeah.
I now have people write it into my contract as an appendix, so it has to be observed. And it's going to vary what people need. So we have some examples, we have a template, we have a list of things you might want to consider when writing it, and we have interviews with artists who've used them, interviews with organisations who have worked with people with access docs, some who haven't, but are kind of like sharing their thoughts on what it, like whether, just basically saying that they would be up for having one, because I
Yeah.
think that's part of what we learn and wanted to share, is that you can do that and it's not too demanding, or like,
Yeah.
or Johanna says, think diva.
Yeah.
Because their point is that like rock stars have access riders basically.
Yeah.
So, you know, if they can have that, then why shouldn't we have our needs met?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it's a really great, it's, you know, for those watching, it's a really, really great resource. I'll have it linked somewhere around here for those that would like to take a look at it. I'm talking about, you know, the arts industry in general. Obviously, there are it's problematic in many ways, but speaking particularly within inclusivity and accessibility for those with disabilities, what would you personally like to see as commonplace in the gallery space, or, you know, in the art industry in general?
I think there's a lot of things.
Yeah.
I think we're really behind in this country. I mean, many countries are, and I don't think anywhere's got it perfect, but just on a lot of the basics which have been asked for a long time. Things like automatic BSL for events and films and anything that needs it, and transcriptions, and visual descriptions, things like that, which, you know, and wheelchair access, of course. But some of them you don't need to even spend any money, like just having your access information clear on your website or wherever you've listed an event or exhibition or whatever it is. Even if it's not accessible at all, if you are putting that in the details, saying there is wheelchair access, or like, then that saves somebody who might have wanted to visit having to do the labour themselves in getting in touch and finding out the information. And it just shows that you've at least thought about people who might not be able to visit otherwise. But yeah, then there are I don't know, so there are some basics. There's a lot of basics that just are not up to scratch.
Yeah.
You know, but then I guess there are kind of more nuanced things that are just kind of harder to kind of put on a list or to write down, just like ways of working with artists. And sensitivities that are just kind of, it's hard to explain, but you know, in a way that you can kind of put as a bullet point.
Yeah. Oh yeah. I'm aware that was a very big question for anyone to answer.
Yeah, but I guess so an audit is always a good thing. So you can have an audit done to look at what, you know, by a professional company that can go through like the very technical stuff with you. And you can work out whether, I mean, I think everyone should be always working towards making their organisation as accessible as possible. But at least if you do that, you can start seeing what you can do for free initially, and then like what you need to fundraise to do the other stuff. Instead of just kind of adding stuff on every now and again, as and when. Thinking before disabled artists have to ask for it, or disabled audience members. And then, you know, you can do things like have consultants, like I do consultancy work, Alice Hattrick does, people like Kyla Harris do, pay disabled artists to do consultancy work with you as well.
So another one is, obviously at the start of this talk, we gave kind of visual descriptions or image descriptions of ourselves, and I noticed on your Instagram you give detailed image descriptions for each post. Could you maybe just explain a little bit about why it is that you do this and why it's important, or maybe something that other people might consider to do as well?
Yeah, so Instagram, actually you can do it, they have an option to do it as alt text, So yeah, if you Google that, then there's instructions. So there's a few different sites that have instructions on how to do that, and that means that it's kind of written into the image, so you don't see it. You have a screen reader on, and then it reads it aloud. I do that, and then I also put it in the comment section as well, because I don't know. I mean, I'm always trying to work out how to do things, and there's I noticed I started doing it in the comments, and then I realized this feature was available, and then I just started doing that, and then somebody else said that you should do both, because different people have different kind of software and stuff. So I just do both. But basically what it does is it just includes people who are blind or have low vision, to be able to just know what's going on in front of them, just like, pretty basic.
Yeah.
You can have fun with it, like the artist Shannon Finnegan, who is wonderful, does these workshops called alt text as poetry. So alt text being alternative text, meaning like description of the image.
Yeah.
As poetry, where you can kind of like do really kind of elaborate descriptions and it can turn into poetry. I was thinking about this in a photographic context, like if you were to present a exhibition of photography, a photograph, you could accompany that, if you wanted to, with a book that has written image descriptions that are really poetic, and are kind of, those poems become like an extension of each work. And you can have that fun with it. You don't have to, and if you don't have the energy or the time or whatever, then just basic information is still really important.
You know, kind of, we spoke about it a little bit earlier, how the pandemic has kind of encouraged art institutions to innovate, basically, for those who can't leave their homes. You kind of touched upon a couple of things, but in what way have you seen this benefits some of the disabled community?
So people who can't leave the house, or can't always leave the house, have been able to suddenly have access to in the art world it would be exhibitions or events and things like that, but I think also there's disabled students who were able to have online lectures and things like this. I mean, it's quite complicated how people feel about it, though, because it opens up this kind of accessibility, which was both exciting for a lot of people, but then really hurtful, because it was like, oh, so you always could have done this, but you didn't,
right?
Because we don't matter, but when it's able-bodied people, suddenly it matters. You know, some people who had been requesting things like lectures to be recorded, and that had been refused based on the idea that it wasn't possible for whatever reason, and it was suddenly very possible. That's kind of a slap in the face. But hoping that continues for disabled people, because the other thing is that a lot of these innovations and move online were not done with disabled people in mind, so a lot of them weren't accessible for everyone. So like not having transcriptions or BSL or whatever else is actually needed. So I don't know, I'm hoping we can sort of retain the good and keep working on it to get better.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've enjoyed having different art institutions in my home. It's been really great to be able to travel around the world and see lots of really incredible art institutions that even, as an able-bodied person, financially I wouldn't have been able to see, like exhibitions internationally that, I just wouldn't have been able to see if it hadn't been put online, which has been really great.
Yeah, because if you think about access as a broader thing than just about disability, it's about intersectional struggles like to do gender and race, economics, like perhaps you're a person of color who doesn't feel comfortable going into a particular area, but you're really interested in the program of this particular art center that's in that area, or to then be able to have access to it, or maybe you work night shifts or have childcare responsibilities, and there's a lot of reasons to try and consider that.
Yeah, definitely. Going back to you and your work, so you're currently an artist in residence at the Serpentine Gallery. Could you tell us a little bit about how you're finding that experience?
Yeah, so it's complicated, and so I made this page at the very beginning it had the title of Cryptkin, which is kind of like a shout out to some, not all of the people, because that list would be endless, but some of the people who are doing really amazing and important work around disability. So mostly artists, but other kinds of people too. It felt really important to me to be able to share any platform I had with people, because my work isn't in isolation, and it builds on those people, particularly people of colour, who, historically and still now always have their labour undermined and just appropriated. So yeah, that felt really important to me. And then beyond that, I don't know, it's complicated. If you're a freelance person, particularly an artist, but any kind of freelance person entering into a institution that already has predefined structures and has existed a long time before you were there, it's going to be complex. But there's something that's supposed to be coming out from that in the next few weeks, which I'm really
very exciting. Very exciting. Yeah, because my next question was going to be, do you have any new work or exhibitions on the horizon? But I think that answers the question.
Yeah, there's that thing, which I won't say too much about it before it comes out, but then and then there's other things, but I also can't talk about them. I have like quite a few things that are happening, but you'll just have to follow me on Instagram or sign up to my newsletter.
I'll put a link to your Instagram as well, somewhere around here, so people can keep an eye out for very mysterious, exciting projects coming up. So
one of them very heavily involves my Olympus OM1. So
staying on keep it. And then the last question I have for you today is, what would you say is the biggest lesson that you've learned throughout your career?
I think probably just, as long as is possible and where is possible, just to have the general feeling that we're all on the same team. And I don't mean taking shit or treating people shit or even the same, but I mean there is a culture in some parts of the art world, especially for artists, to be competitive, and I don't find it helpful at all. And I think it's based on a myth of scarcity, and just from the generosity of other artists, art workers, curators, disabled peers, who are just so willing to like give advice behind the scenes, support in like an emotional way or a practical way, or I don't know, even just like I guess like scientists that I've reached out to talk about things, just kind of obviously not overstretching yourself if you can't, but just to like give where you can, and just having a feeling of mutual support is I think that's the most important thing.
It doesn't benefit anyone, including yourself, if you're horrible to people. It really doesn't. Obviously big advocate of that. But yeah, absolutely, couldn't agree more. But Leah, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been incredibly informative, and thanks so much for speaking so openly about what we're discussing today. And thanks again as well to everyone who's watching. It's been a pleasure to have you here, and I hope you enjoyed watching and listening as much as I did. Everyone, have a wonderful evening, and I'll see you all soon. Bye.